The 4 areas I want to really cover, which is what's influencing our decision making currently in our environment, and how as coaches we have to be really conscious of how we're delivering our communication to the changing model of society. The second thing is, what are the top players doing that it's allowing them to have the better decision making in the split seconds up here in Croke Park? And the third thing is, as coaches, how do we develop that? So the first slide you'll be saying might have no relevance to sport, but it is very important to get aware of this knowledge. The biggest combat to our decision making as a society at the moment is the mobile phone. Why is that? You have a player who starts college in the morning, he's listening to lectures all day, he's listening to conversations, he's on social media, he's WhatsApp, he's emails, he's conversations outside him he's hearing but he's not even listening to. Then he's consuming articles online all day. By 7 o'clock that evening, how much knowledge has that player consumed? Research would tell us 174 newspapers. How much space is in his mind now to take 15 minutes of a presentation from his coach on how we're going to tackle this year? How many times have you been with a past manager or past coach who, when he interrupts a drill, he steps in for 5 minutes and tells you everything that we're doing wrong? And the player's walking back going, doing the drill, and we're going, doing it again, or that game-based approach. He doesn't know what we're trying to work on. People on average are spending 150 times a day checking their phone. They're on their phone 3 to 5 hours a day. Over the course of a lifetime, that's 7 years. What if you put that 7 years into something else? What would you become? Why do I have a goldfish up on a slide in Croke Park? In 2000, they measured the average attention span of a human being. It was at 12 seconds. In 2013, that's fallen to 8 seconds. So the goldfish is at 9 seconds, he's won that battle. So maybe we need to put a goldfish bowl in the middle of the dressing room to remind players who's listening more, is it the goldfish or you? So that study was 4 years ago. Where do we think our attention span has dropped to now? If I was to guess, it's probably down at 4 or 5 seconds. Human mind can probably only hold a thought for about 5 seconds. So the critical thing as coaches, what's the critical message I need to just deliver here? The core message. I can only consume 7 to 8 pieces of information at any one time. After that, my brain is just trying to filter out any other rubbish around that to make room for something else. Could you step in a coaching session and deliver your message in 7 to 8 words? Could you deliver a team talk in 7 to 8 words? When you're running onto the field to give an instruction, can you deliver it in 7 or 8 words? Because other than that, you're just putting confusion into his head and he's no clarity. So a pint could be a pint of milk, but it's just a framework I'd like you to think of for a minute. How much your language around the coaching setup is positive? You can do this. We can win the next ball. How often are you repeating them phrases in training? How often are you putting irrelevant thoughts or information out to the players? How often are you negative? That was a terrible strike. That was a really poor white. And how often are we task-focused or instructional-focused? Where we give specific coaching language to that player, that develops a mental model in his head what the coach wants, and he's very clear and he goes back to that pattern all the time. Where do you think you need to be living most of the time? So who maybe figured this model out or didn't figure this model out years ago? Coach I'd study a lot of would be a fellow called John Wooden. So 2 psychologists in the States went and observed Wooden for a season. And they modeled over 2,500 interactions he had with his players. He never spoke for any more than 20 seconds. What's the M's up there, the M&M's? Well, they put the framework in when Wooden stepped in to demonstrate in a session. He'd model the right way, he'd model the wrong way, and he'd model the right way again. And he'd do that in less than 3 seconds. And when they looked at all his interactions, 7% of them were compliments. 7% of them was displeasure of what he was seeing in front of him around the behaviour, and the rest was all task instructional language. 86%. Where to go, when to do it, how to do it. When to increase the intensity. And he'd just snap in with coaching language around crisp, snap passes, driving hard, quick steps. They were the little phrases he used to just bounce in every so often. And the lads were looking for this magic to happen around him, and that's all he delivered on all season. One of the biggest characteristics of John Wooden was he would plan with his coaches the session for 2 hours. And every minute of that session, he'd have a card for and what they were working on. And he made sure that every session was harder than the basketball match they were going to encounter. And he called it mental and emotional conditioning. So he made sure the intensity was higher than Anthony experienced out in Crow Park. So you have a player in front of you, and you get into a huddle after 60 seconds of the training session. And you're speaking to the group, and maybe you speak for a minute. What's he actually retaining? Well, research would tell us 10% of the spoken knowledge. How can we increase what he retains? Maybe with a flip chart with written points on it. How do we increase the knowledge even more again? You might have a tactics board, an iPad, or a visual presentation. And now we're ramping up the possibility of that player who's read 174 newspapers today actually remembering what the coach said on Tuesday night. Is there anything wrong with having a consistent message throughout the week and throughout the year? Are we just running towards the newest phase of training and the newest modcon, a conversation that we've read in an article? How do we learn? So I'm lecturing you here today. Maybe you might learn something, 5% of it. Maybe I might surprise you and we'll actually get into some practice of doing things and increase our chances. How often over last season did you live in the red zone here? That you had a group discussion after a game-based drill? Obviously we're all practicing by doing, and that's getting certain results. And then the last piece, would you have the courage as a coach to identify maybe 5 players in your group that you're going to coach for the year and ask them to take a part of the training session? Why couldn't a full back line coach the tackle to the rest of the full back line? Why couldn't a free taker coach another free taker? Why couldn't a goalkeeper coach another goalkeeper? Or is it our ego as coaches that we think we have all the knowledge? The next section, our brain under pressure. So I'm going to talk about this from a coaching perspective and a player perspective. What might be happening to us when we come under stress in the last 10 minutes of a match or even before the game. So there's a great book out there called The Chimp Paradox by Dr. Steve Peters, who had worked with the Great Britain Olympic cycling team. Ronnie O'Sullivan, the snooker player who probably turns up for one championship a year and wins the world championship. And he broke it down into 3 very simple aspects. So the computer is where all the thoughts and processes and ideas come into your head during the course of a day. And as we know, we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. So that's just happening there, churning away in the background. The next part of our brain is the limbic part of the brain, or the chimp. Now, the positives of the chimp that we all have is this gives us great skills like loyalty, motivation, compassion, sympathy. It also gets us into action mode. So if we see a child in front of a bus, we're not even thinking of it, we're just going saving that child. Or the last 10 minutes of a game, we might be 5 points down, it gets you urgent to make a decision on the line to get a sub in. The negative side of the chimp, he can be over emotional. So a player out in your pitch might be too hyped up for a game, and he's committing foul after foul after foul and getting a yellow card, and his chimp is just dominating him. It can be lazy and unpredictable, the chimp as well. So some days he's on, some days he's off. The prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, this is our logical and rational thinking person. He's the planning, he's the direction. He gives us a sense of perspective of all that's around us. So I'm out in that playing environment. Pre-FC is in control. I can see all the plays in front of me. I'm nice and relaxed, and he's planning and directing me. The negative side of the PFC. Sometimes he can overthink and overanalyze and fail to make a decision. So if you were to reflect on yourself as a coach, the chimp is kind of like the engine that we all need to get us started and motivated and gives us drive and energy and passion. We've got to manage him. The PFC is that logical, rational thinker who's cool and calm under pressure. Which was in control in your last match when you're under pressure? Were you been driven off emotion too much? Or were you overanalyzing and overthinking? And it's about getting a balance between the two. So what might happen is mind and body under stress. We've all probably experienced we're getting instruction from a sideline or in the middle of a training session after bursting a gut, and you just can't actually hear anything. There's tunnel hearing going in, heart rate is up through the roof, and I'm just not absorbing information. Or maybe my vision is just narrowed, and all I can see is the referee who's made that decision in front of me, and I'm going to give him all a piece of my mind because my stress levels are up through the roof. Sometimes we have an inability to pick up on cues in our environment because our eyes are just racing all over the place. You'd often see this in dressing room with young players who are stressed going out in All-Ireland finals. Their eyes are just racing around the dressing room and you can't relax. And my loss of depth perception. So maybe I'm not able to see 40 or 50 yards out in the field when the pressure comes on in the last 5 minutes of a game. So our excitement levels. We work very hard with players on making sure these are right, but also with coaches. If my excitement level is up at a 9 or 10 out of 10, well then if I'm over-motivated and I'm over-aroused, chimp is too strong, I may be zoned in on that referee that made that last call, and I'm no use to anyone outside of that. So my vision is narrowed and my motivation is fixed on something. If, on the other hand, I'm down at 1 or 2 out of 10, I'm not that excited, well then I can get distracted about who's in the stand, what kind of weather it is, and I'm no use to my team either. So it's very important as coaches, you know what level you're at when your chimp and your PFC are nice and balanced and you're in that relaxed and focused state. And we can build into that as coaches. So we have a stimulus out in Crow Park as a coach, last 5 minutes of a game. We're 2 points down, the referee gives a decision against us. What's our response going to be? Do we get highly charged and let the chimp take over, bring out frustration and anger, and channel the next minute into giving the ref a good effing? Or can I clear my mind, take a breath? What will a breath do? It's connected to the brain, the heart, the lungs, central nervous system. So if my heart rate is up through the roof, quickest thing that's going to bring that down is taking a breath. Then I start to clear the fog and let the PFC take over and give me a clear decision. I may ask myself a question. What's actually important now? And I'm shaking my subconscious into conscious thinking, and I need to get a sub on, or I need to talk to my management team. And that's stopping the bollocking to my referee. I might say a statement to myself. I am calm, I am relaxed, and maybe that's a trigger I've used regularly. So would you like to try an exercise for 1 minute to change your state? So you're after a stressful day in work, you're going into a coaching session, you've had troubles at home with family as well, child is sick, and you want to go into the coaching session with the right energy in front of your players. Or maybe on a bus to a match, you're feeling stressed in your body, you're feeling tight, and you know before you go into that dressing room you want to change your state, that you're relaxed and calm. So I'm going to ask you to sit upright in your chair, close your eyes, 2 feet firmly on the ground. And we're going to tap into a different energy system that maybe some of you aren't used to. So I want you to inhale in through your nose for a count of 4. Hold on to that breath for a count of 4. And blow out through your mouth for a count of 4. Good and aggressively. And I want you to repeat that 4 or 5 times. Notice where the air is leaving the body now. Now, every time you're thinking, your mind starts to wander into what you're thinking, bring it back to the breath and just label it as thinking. Become aware every time now your mind starts to wander and bring it back to your breath. Now, before you step into that dressing room, put out the intention and the energy that you want to convey in front of your players. What's the body language you'll bring in there? What eye contact will you make? How will you carry your shoulders? Now just come back to the breath, 2 or 3 more breaths, and just blow out any last bit of tension, tiredness out of it. Just notice you're back against the chair, your feet on the ground, fully centered in the moment. And open the eyes. So all we're doing before we hit a stimulus is in that gap, what am I putting in there? I can put in a breath, I can put in a question, I can put in a statement that's going to change my response. I'm becoming aware as a coach, what triggers me? Is it an opposition manager? Is it a poor decision by the referee? Is it a mistake by one of my players that brings me down the wrong path? We'll then become aware of it first, and then we can start to change. Section 3, what are the best players doing under pressure? So they're able to recognize and recall structured patterns. How might we develop this in our coaching session? A lot of teams using video analysis now. What could be a great question to ask a player after a player before you show a play? To check his recall on what happened. Very often when I do this, players will remember the flight of the ball that came in. They'll remember how close the back was to them. They'll remember the goalie's positioning. So you firing off that neural connection in their brain again and ask them on it is just strengthening it even further. So when that pattern comes up again, he'll link it in that split-second decision he has to make, and he'll repeat it. The top players will recognize the development play earlier. So when I'm sitting down a one-to-one with a player, we'd often watch the opposition half-back line. And we'd look at body cues. How long is he holding the hurl? how open is his body, where is his hips, head, feet in alignment. And you can pick up patterns for opposition half-back lines then if I'm in the full back line, if this strike is going short or if it's going long. And players are beginning to recognise them cues then when they go out the pitch a bit quicker. And it's giving them that half a yard over defenders. The top players. So you go back and you go into a club session after playing inter-county for 10 years, and I'd often play in the forwards. And you'd notice a full-back you'd be marking at club level, he has to watch the ball constantly where it is. Whereas the county player coming back, he's only having a glance to see where the defender is, where the space is, before that 3 or 4 seconds before that ball lands. So he's not wasting time ball watching, and very often you see the club defender and he start wandering out towards the ball is, and the inter-county fella's gone to the far corner. So encouraging that in your players to not be ball looking but short looks, and what cues they need to be picking up in their environment about the opposition and the space and where it is, and coaching from behind the goals on this. The top players extract the minimum essential information. So if a ball is coming in from the half-back line, club player is probably saying there's 5 or 6 scenarios that could happen here, and he's getting stuck and freezing and not doing anything. County player, very quickly he'll narrow it down to 1 or 2 decisions and he'll go with it. Superior knowledge of situational probabilities. This is developed, I see, from open questioning and video analysis sessions with your players one-to-one. It's developed from playing the game and game experience. So you think of a Joe Canning or a Noel McGrath or a Shane McCallan, why do they have so much time in the ball? Why are they making better decisions 9 times out of 10? Their first glance is not controlling the ball head down and making 4 steps. Or Gooch, for instance, is taking a hop or a solo, having a quick scan to see where the space is inside. Where's my opposition defender? Where's the space? Where's my forward running? If that's not on, they'll have a second and third glance by taking an extra touch, and they'll make that quick scan and they'll narrow it down to them 1 or 2 decisions. So how do you as a coach create that environment where your club player that wants to make a step up isn't working on the technical skill for the first 3 seconds and missing a whole game out here? How do we as a coach model them behaviours and show them to the player? So Mickey Whelan talked about the perception, the decision and the action earlier. So in the perception phase, what we want our players is primarily at ease, that they're able to see a wide view. Okay? And they're able to think, see and hear very easily. When they're moving into the decision phase, they're very much on their own thought process and what I need to execute. And the last part then, in the action phase, we want players free from thought and just working on the external. So that can be just striking the ball or looking further afield. So if I was a coach, I'd be really encouraging players. Perception phase, I'm nice and loose and I can see the narrow and broad game in front of me. Decision phase, now I'm into my own internal box here. I've got to narrow it down to 1 or 2. And my action phase should be completely external, where I'm not worrying about how I'm striking the ball, who I'm striking it to. It's just very external and letting it go. So as coaches, how do we improve decision making? In our game, both football and hurling, there's probably 2 elements to the tactical side. So we've scheme as a play, which are sidelines, frees, puck outs. Could be anything up to 75 or 80 of these during the game. Do we need to coach players through this? Do we need to walk players through this? What's my position off the ball? You take a lot of the coaching that happens, 50% of the time the ball is out of play. If you reflect on your last session, how much of the coaching do we do with the ball? And why are we neglecting maybe 50% of the other 14 players that aren't on the ball and how they position themselves? So you've the lad executing the skill, the lad receiving the ball, he's off the ball, and there's maybe 3 or 4 other players around that receiving that sideline. Can we coach that to get possession 100% of the time? Can we coach long frees and how we defend them? Can we coach 21s and how we defend them? These will be all schemes of plays. Then the tactical side of it. Walking through, I've seen had huge development with players where if we're going with a particular system around a sweeper, walking through that play with the 15 players and openly asking questions. What's your role when the ball goes into the corner? Where are you positioned? What's your role when your man drops out to midfield? And getting them to come up with the answers all the time that they're deciding on how they're going to action it. There's huge learnings in that for players and huge empowerment in it for them. Decision-making drills. So how can I overload a player with so many decisions that he gets mentally fatigued so quickly that it's like a game scenario? Well, we can cut down on space. We can put in a time constraint. We could maybe put in colours that he has to call out as he's executing a skill. Maybe we give him maths complications that we overload him. And very quickly he'll start to learn, how do I distill this down into the 1 or 2 decisions I need to make? And you'll see very quickly when you start doing these drills with players that 15 to 20 seconds at the start they're beginning to break down, mental fatigue, can't even control a ball. During the course of the season this can rise up to a minute, 2 minutes, where they're just distilling it down and doing the most required basic skill for the 1 or 2 minutes and losing all the other fluff. When they go out in Crow Park then, very little decisions to make because they're used to being under that pressure all the time. So I'm not going to go over on everything else there. Appreciating the different learning styles. So in your room as a player, we may have auditory players that learn by listening, learn by doing. Be aware of them in your room and how I'm going to deliver. So if I'm all spoken, what's the percentage of my room I'm capturing? If I'm using video, now I'm increasing my chances of retaining it. If we're practicing by doing, now our chances are up another 75%. And if I'm able to release the control and actually let players lead and parts of the game plan, parts of the coaching session, parts of the drills, well now we're really increasing the team and really getting them moving. I find over the last 3 years one of the biggest learnings I've done before the game has come on is doing the what if then scenario. So I'll get the management team I'm working with to come up with 20, 30 probabilities that will come up on the day. And we've decided on that before we go out, this is our action. And it takes away a whole lot of pressure where you're not trying to solve something for 3 minutes on the sideline. You're able to go to one of the selectors or whoever is doing it on the day and say, what do we decide when they drop a man back? And we just go and action it. And it really cuts down on stress and pressure on match day. So I'm going to probably finish with the player in front of you. And a lot of stuff I've listened to today were probably giving you technical knowledge and stuff like that. But it really comes down to is the person in front of you. How much do you know about his personal and professional life? What are his ambitions as a player and as a person outside the environment? What is he aware of he's really good at? What is he aware of he's not so good at? And how is he developing these? So he might spend 3 nights a week in the gym, but is that the biggest bang for his buck over the next 9 months to make him a better player? What's the area he needs to go after? Looking at a player's lifestyle and a structure around his life and what's the obstacles and challenges for him? How does he overcome them? What's his mental framework around the setbacks he's having? If he gets dropped off a squad, how does he react to it? If he loses form or confidence in the season, how does he react to it? If he's a challenge in his personal life, how does he react to it and how does that influence him? So if we've that player coming into you under stress and under pressure, 174 newspapers read in the day, how is your message going to get through to him if you're not aware of his background and how his day went? And I think I've been lucky enough over the last 15 years to be involved as a player and now as a sports psychologist and a coach. I'm still seeing the best managers and the best coaches coming up. It really is how much you care. They don't care about your knowledge, your capabilities. It's really how much you care. So don't underestimate the value of the hour and a half sitting down having a cup of tea with that player versus doing 5 coaching sessions with him. You'll get so much back in the long run. Thanks everyone for your time.